Okay. Hello. Today I'm joined by Chris Marshall. Thank you very much for your time, Chris. I'm going to start off by asking Chris very briefly about his main Tai Chi teachers. I know he's seen a lot of different teachers. So if you want a more thorough bio, his websites and the Dowie Talks interview maybe gives a longer a bio of Chris's teachers. But if you could just sort of briefly introduce your sort of main Yang style teachers.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon or this morning, maybe in your time zone.
Yeah, it is. In Australia, it's still morning. Yeah.
Okay, very well. So I'm warmed up and you're just still getting started.
Yeah.
Chris Marshall from Shoreline Tai Chi, and I've been doing Tai Chi for the majority of my life. Um, I first started, I first gained some interest in Tai Chi back in high school. And from that point, I became very curious in finding out which of these spectacular stories about Tai Chi were actually true. And so I have spent the last 20 to 30 years determining that in a factual basis and becoming the next generation of Tai Chi
Yeah.
masters.
I guess in terms of the stories that you refer to, I guess maybe the main story is maybe the little old man from China using his chi to defeat much physically more athletic, stronger opponents. I guess is that sort of the main story? I guess that you were attracted to, or
Sure. Well, that is indeed the nexus of the stories. You know, if we were to be picking out individual elements, it would be claims, for example, that Tai Chi is not a martial art, which is already a little bit confusing if you've been seeing Tai Chi on television and just seeing, old people waving their arms around. That's already confusing. But then to go further and claim that Tai Chi is the ultimate martial art, it's the supreme martial art, well, now you're really saying something here. And then to say not only that, for example, you are capable of handling people who attack you for real, but somehow that they just bounce off of you. And somehow when they try to hit you, it has no effect. And so on and so forth, that type of thing.
and have you sort of I guess you've have you directly experienced any of these powers? I think I've sort of seen a few interviews with you before where maybe you were sort of a little bit disappointed by some of your earlier teachers, perhaps, or that they didn't seem to have the amazing skills. But have you sort of experienced? I guess maybe woo woo is sort of a slightly derogatory term for these skills that we're talking about. Have you sort of directly experienced any masters who sort of maybe magic powers is a bit strong, but who sort of have almost supernatural like
Sure,
abilities?
sure. Well, I mean, Paul, I've seen all these things and I've done all these things.
Okay, so could you drop a few names then in terms of the people who you feel really had with the real deal?
Sure. So my process, as I was saying, was back in high school, I heard a lot of stories which I found unbelievable, and I've been searching around to try to find people who could uh, embody and demonstrate them. And it's been a long process of, introducing myself to a Tai Chi teacher, observing their practice, giving it a taste, and let's just say it wasn't what I was looking for. All right, I didn't come on this interview to badmouth anyone, of course, but the claims are so extreme that the performance has to be extreme. Otherwise, it's just falling short. So, maybe people should be a little bit more humble with their claims or work a little bit harder on their skills, one or the other, or perhaps both. But, I started off just searching locally. For me, that's a Seattle area, which is, an excellent place to be studying Asian martial arts, given that, it's on the
Large
Pacific.
Chinese community, yeah.
Right, that's right. We have tremendous opportunity from Vancouver down to San Diego and all points in between. So it wasn't for a lack of choice. But as I was saying, I just wasn't quite happy with what I was finding. And so, I just gradually expanded my search down to California, across the United States, and across the Pacific as well. And, I met a lot of good people. And as I continued to study, my standards, of course, just kept rising continuously as well. So I cited a lot of names in my biography on the website. These are all people that I deeply respect. I wouldn't want anyone to think that everyone I named was either someone that I had challenged or a rival or a teacher. It's not that way. Some of them are my teachers, some of them are my friends, and so on.
Yeah,
But any who I named, I don't name people who are bad.
yeah.
I just let them go by.
Okay. So in terms of your, I guess the most influential or the ones that you rated most highly, I guess there was, is it Xie Bingcan? Would you describe him as your sort of main teacher? Or
Yes, I would say more so than anyone else. And to give people a short biography of Xie Bingcan, it's like this. He came up kind of similar to me. He had an obsessive interest in Tai Chi and demanded only the best, most authentic, highest level stuff. And so he himself studied from his, I think, early 20s all the way through to his mid 80s, and just kept going full bore that entire time.
so it's mainly
And
Fu Zhongwen Yang style and the Ma Yue Liang Wu style were his main teachers.
they were his main teachers. I think similar to myself, he met a ton of people, and these two are the names that anybody will recognize. So they come up in conversation. But yes, he did study with them, and he did more than just study with them. It's my understanding that Xie Bingcan traveled around China with Fu Zhongwan, and just like in a previous generation, Fu had handled incoming challenges for Master Yang Chengfu. Master Xie also handled challenges on behalf of Fu. And for those people who might not understand the way it works in Chinese martial arts is, you travel to a new town, perhaps to try to set up an affiliate, basically. And other local martial artists want you out of their territory. Or maybe they want to compare skills. Either of these things can happen. They can both be true at the same time. And so they come and ask for a friendly challenge. And the master says, well, I don't know this guy. He might be great. I better send him against one of my students first. And then at least he'll be tired. All right. If he has to face me next. So that's the truth about how it actually works. And Xie did quite well for himself, for Fu, and for Yang style at large.
And do you know about with the Ma Yue Liang was maybe I think I did a bit of a montage of Wu and Ma was on it sort of I guess it would have been late 80s in Shanghai. There was sort of maybe kind of I guess maybe some no touch stuff from him. Did Xie sort of speak much about Ma Yue Liang, or was he mainly interested in sort of teaching the Yang style to you there? Not
Uh, his classes were 4 hours long, and 4 hours might sound long, but it's not nearly long enough when you've been studying continuously for 60 years and are trying to impart as much as you can to your students. So it's always a question of what do you put into the class and what do you leave out, and you can never cover as much as you would like to. That's certainly my story running, classes 60 to 90 minutes or 2 hours each. So we were focused. It's not right to say that we were focused on Yang style per se, because as it has been said, all of Tai Chi is one family. But it is true that we spent a lot more time working on the Yang style form than the Wu style form.
And can I ask what the curriculum was? Obviously, a lot of the time in modern Tai Chi classes, the curriculum is mainly based on form. And, a lot of people maybe don't do any push hands or applications or self-defense. Well, I guess what's for your classes or for Xie's classes, What was what's the typical sort of structure of the class? Was it sort of mainly form or partly form or an even mixture of form and more martial elements?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit informal, at least it appeared to be a little bit informal to us. Um, and it would depend on his mood and what we had worked on last week. And of course, it would depend on who showed up and their own qualifications. But Master Xie was very deeply invested in making sure we did the form well. And we would take sometimes a single move and work on it nonstop for maybe 16 hours. Single move for 16 hours. And we would do the form, the long form, which if people don't know, that's something on the order of 18 minutes. We would start a class typically by doing the long form 3 to 5 times. And that was just your qualification to be in the class. And doing it to the highest standard that we were capable of doing. And then we would start the more explicit lecture and learning and correction phase of the class.
And could I
And
ask, was
yeah,
his
go ahead.
form quite similar to sort of the? I know you mentioned you studied with the Yang sort of family lineage. I guess the Yang Zhendor lineage. Was it sort of similar? Were there sort of some big differences between, I guess, Fu Zhongwen and the Yang sort of family lineage?
Yes, so I'd have to say in the big picture, it was really quite similar. But you know, there's a tyranny of small differences that appears when insiders get together and compare notes. So, you know, I could talk about individual differences in their formal forms, and then there's maybe differences in priority and intensity and other things as well.
Yeah.
But long story short, you know, to the outside eyes, they wouldn't necessarily see any difference whatsoever.
Okay. Um, okay, and I guess I'm also keen to talk to you about push hands. Maybe I came across you sort of on the internet, maybe posting sort of competitive push hands footage. Maybe often people reply with, "Oh, this is using Li and not Chi or Jin." I guess I'm curious to get your take on what do you say to new students about what push hands is, why you're practicing push hands? I guess what is your philosophy on what qualities are you aiming to cultivate when you're pushing hands? Because I guess a lot of people are a little bit critical of the competitive push hands. It looks quite physical and intense, maybe, and maybe they feel this is not what good Tai Chi should look like. Um, could you maybe talk about um, your philosophy on push hands and what is push hands? Why do we practice it? What are we
Okay,
seeking to cultivate
okay, okay,
with push hands?
okay.
Sorry, lots of questions. It's quite a big question there. Many questions in one. Yeah,
Yeah, let me try to take them in a bit of a reverse order.
yeah,
First, let me say that, you know, on most social media platforms, the person who posts content has the privilege of allowing a comment or deleting it, or selectively deleting them as they may choose to do in order to cultivate whatever public image they prefer to create. My own preference has been to just leave all the comments, and that means leaving negative comments as well. And people who watch this should know that other people who call themselves Tai Chi masters are simply deleting the negative comments. I can state this for absolute fact because I've seen the comments disappear. So when you watch my videos and you think they're getting the most negative feedback,
yeah,
what you're actually seeing is simply less editing. All
yeah.
right. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about what push hands is and why anybody should do it and what it means. I think in order to properly contextualize that question, we need to take one step back and just ask ourselves briefly what Tai Chi is. Because people who don't formally study Tai Chi nevertheless have a fairly strong sense of what it is due to their just interaction with the popular media, TV, movies, etc. Okay? So they see old people wearing fancy costumes moving slowly in the park. And if you ask them whether that is Tai Chi, they have to say yes. What
And
choice do
essentially,
they have?
it's
Yes.
calisthenics, but for the elderly. For
Yeah,
that, and
right,
certainly where I am, that's what most people think Tai Chi is. I would,
right.
yeah.
And even going so far as calling it calisthenics is maybe even increasing the intensity beyond what is normally conceived.
Yeah.
If you see anybody sweating, you might be inclined to say, "Well, that can't be it." It's supposed to be relaxing, and relaxing is meant to be the opposite of strain or intensity. All right, so that's one outlook on Tai Chi. And if we have that outlook, then we can ask, why is anybody doing push hands or doing it at some high level of intensity? But the thing is, of course, that's not Tai Chi. That's not Tai Chi at all. And when we try to compare that definition of Tai Chi with the storied achievements of Tai Chi over the last 150 years, there's just no match at all. You do one, it doesn't get you any closer at all to the other. So now we have to grapple with the actual definition of Tai Chi, which is it is a type of Kung Fu. And Kung Fu doesn't mean violence and doesn't mean fighting. Kung Fu means a set of skills. So Tai Chi is the cultivation of a set of skills. And practicing the Tai Chi form is one way in which you do that. And practicing push hands is another way in which you do that. So people who contemplate the question should have the answer already. Why would a Tai Chi practitioner train in push hands? Because push hands is Tai Chi.
And I guess what when you have a student who's never pushed before, what do you say to them? To what do you say you have to try? What do you say to them that they have to try and do? In Do you say that they have to off balance you or push you or learn to apply the energies from the form or um,
Yeah, so there's a progression of games that we play in my classes. When I first started teaching, uh, let me back up a little bit and say that in my experience, probably the majority of people who walk into a Tai Chi class don't have any conception of push hands. And if you ask them whether they want to do it or not, the answer is not. All right, the majority of people, not
yeah.
all, but the majority. And
Would
it
you
was my
accept that?
practice early. It was my
Yeah.
practice early on to not ask you whether you want to do it or not. This is
Yeah.
a Tai Chi class. You don't have to be here, but if you are going to be here, you have to do Tai Chi, and that's part of
Okay.
it. Yeah. So we would spend something on the order of 35% of the class working on different push hands games. And again, my experience from the early days was even though the majority of people, if you ask them up front whether they wanted to do it or not, they would say no. If you actually just said, hey, just give this a try for 10 minutes, and then you can tell me whether you like it or not. After that 10 minutes, the majority of people liked it and
Yeah.
wanted to.
So you haven't found that it's scared off lots of, I don't know, little old ladies who kind of want to do some form and then they're expected to be doing a martial art. It's not sort of scared off.
Well, listen, little old ladies have been some of my best students, first
Yeah.
of all. But nobody needs to be afraid of push hands because there's levels to the game. And frankly, the reason that push hands exists is to allow people to cultivate Tai Chi skills in a safe and yet also effective way. So that's the whole reason it exists. So to say that I don't like martial arts, therefore I shouldn't do push hands, you're totally missing the point.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, there's levels to the game, and even for people who are not tremendously fit or tremendously aggressive, there's still versions of push hands that are highly appropriate and beneficial for them, and they should be doing it.
Yeah. And I
Should
guess
at least try.
you mentioned fitness, and often, I guess, within the Tai Chi community, that we people like to think that size and fitness don't matter. Do
Mhm.
you disagree with that? I mean, most of the martial arts have quite clearly defined weight categories. Maybe people sort of get physically fit if they're going to compete. Do you think the same should apply to competitive push hands and Tai Chi? Do you think it's sort of a bit of a myth that we don't need to get fit and you know?
Listen, this is absolute madness taking place in the Tai Chi community right now. First of all, they can never stop touting the relevance of Tai Chi to health. And then at the same time, they're going to tell you don't be fit.
Yeah,
That's insane. All right. The number one corollary of health is going to be fitness. And a large part of that is physical fitness. And going beyond that, anytime you see somebody in a deep stance, what are you seeing? You're seeing strength, endurance, cardiovascular health, and other things like that. So nobody should ever talk bad about fitness, period. End of story.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
Um, Now, with all that said, we can, for example, look at writings in the Tai Chi classics. None of them say don't be fit, not at all. They do make statements like, when you see an old man beat a crowd, it can't be as a consequence of his strength. Okay, so it does say that.
and there's like
Uh,
4 ounces moves 1,000 pounds as well. Is it sort of another
well, I'm glad
common
I'm glad
statement?
you brought that up. That's actually not a Tai Chi saying. That is a saying which was borrowed by Tai Chi. And here, I think the detailed words and connotations matter a whole lot. It, of course, 4 ounces can deflect 1,000 units of uh, whatever force. What does it mean to deflect them? I mean, that's a physical reality, right? Any amount of force can deflect any other type of
Yeah,
force. Deflect, of course, is not quite the right word, but nevertheless, the question is not what that says because it's obviously true. It's what it applies and connotes. So that's the area where I think people with a lot of experience in Tai Chi and applying Tai Chi have to reach a different conclusion than people who read the brochure and are quite convinced that they're experts.
yeah. And I guess I was also keen to ask you about competitive push hands and maybe I guess the scene. I mean, you've sort of been to quite a few different competitions. I guess what do you feel you gain from the competitions? And I guess which ones have you enjoyed the most, or which ones do you recommend? I mean, I guess I've been to a couple, and I guess I was hoping to meet skilled players and push hands with lots of new skilled players. And maybe I was a little bit disappointed that I was kind of pushing with people on my level and maybe some of the refereeing and the rule sets were a little bit dubious at some of the ones that I went to as well. So yeah, why do you go to push hands competitions? What do you sort of get from them? Which ones would you recommend going to if somebody's that way inclined?
Yeah, right. Well, I think that many years ago, a newspaper reporter once asked a criminal, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." Where should I rob? I rob the banks because that's where the money is. Uh, I go to
Do you
Tai
feel
Chi
the best
competition.
guys are at those competitions though, in a way? It's often that it might be somebody goes to an obscure competition in the Midwest, then they call themselves the world champion. And I kind of think, I don't think the best guys from Malaysia or China would have been at that competition. Um, do you think you're,
Listen, there's a saying we have in all Chinese martial arts, including Tai Chi. It goes like this: courage first, power second, technique third. If you can't manifest all three of these at the same time, you're not anybody. And so there's always going to be people in martial arts, and very specifically in Tai Chi, who don't have these things. They stay home and then they tell you that they were the best.
I mean, courage
So
is huge,
definitely they aren't.
isn't it? It feels very different when, if there's 50 guys watching you,
Uh-huh.
you feel quite nervous, don't you? That if you're
Oh, yes.
going to be humiliated kind of in front of a large crowd and that put
That's absolutely
on the
true. That's
internet. Yeah.
absolutely true. However, it is also true that, if your qualifications to participate in any such event were totally beyond any dispute, then what would you be nervous about? You don't get nervous when you're drinking a glass of water because you've done it a million times before.
Yeah.
Anyway, you asked, which of these events I would recommend. Of course, competitions have their cons and their downsides. Those have been discussed to death. But this is where you find sincere, hardworking people willing to share their skills. And there aren't that many opportunities for such in Tai Chi. So people who are serious just need to show up, okay? And you just make the best of it, but you'll never get that by staying home. Now, it is true that I've been to a lot of competitions. I've been to a lot of meetups and conferences that aren't competitions as well. And those can be even better in many ways. The con is you'll have a lot of talking, a lot of sitting around and talking, but you can also have a lot of open practice that isn't being governed by, let's say, a 60-second timer. Okay. So I absolutely empathize with people who say they're frustrated that maybe they traveled a few hours to a Tai Chi competition and then they got 3 minutes of practice. It's not necessarily the best investment, although then again, it may be because that may be the experience that you couldn't get anywhere else. But nevertheless, my favorite event of all is really the events that I've been having in Seattle with people, including, for example, Mike Graves, and then our counterparts over in Tampa Bay, Florida, who have a similar event going on. In fact, just in 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. Is that the one? I think I did see some footage of you maybe pushing with Jason Eaton,
Yes.
and I think maybe even Mike Graves. Maybe that was the one in Florida, maybe.
Mhm.
And I think maybe I enjoyed that footage of you maybe in a more relaxed setting more than sort of some of the competition footage.
Sure.
So I think maybe I could see, oh yeah, he's really got something when I sort of saw you pushing relaxed. I could see it wasn't just sort of physicality that you were using there. And I guess often, I think it was actually my first guest, Joey, quite a controversial figure, but he has an interesting take on push hands, where he sort of feels that sometimes with the competitions, it might be the blind leading the blind, where he sees it more as a tool that the teacher would use to show the student something. And I guess I think I do feel often that I get more from push hands when it's more relaxed, casual encounter, I guess, than when the cameras are on and you're trying to win and the adrenaline's flowing. It feels often that it's the kind of the fitter, physically more athletic person that sort of is victorious in those kind of encounters.
Mhm.
Do you think that's a fair assessment, or would you sort of disagree with that?
Well, listen, we have to consider this in context and consider the alternatives. The largest single reason I have any videos out on YouTube at all was simply my sheer frustration from so-called Tai Chi masters putting out fake videos.
Yeah,
So people can say whatever they want about actual minimally or unedited competition footage, but it
yeah.
is real.
And when you say that they're fake,
Other videos are not real.
yeah, but is that in the sense that they're completely choreographed, or is it more that the skills that they're demonstrating only work with that compliant student in that situation and they're not useful for a genuine physical altercation? What do you mean by that they're fake?
It's both of those things. I won't go so far as to say, sure. I mean, it's a valid question. What do I mean by fake? And I thank you for answering it. These practices that people are engaged in are, to my mind, perfectly valid. It's a good thing to be doing at least some of the time with your own students. With that said, when you take some classroom exercise, put it on camera, and then recontextualize it for the internet, that's when I start to say that it's fake. And this happens so much in Tai Chi. There'll be some totally cooperative or largely cooperative classroom training method that then is sold to the public as some sort of fight. I hate it.
Yeah. And primarily you view it as it's marketing, it's people trying to, I mean, it is difficult to earn a good living.
Yes.
Like, are you trying to break people's rice bowls? I think you used that term maybe in another interview. Um,
That's right. And I have no intention to do that. But look, there's no future for Tai Chi if everybody's just trying to fake out everybody else.
yeah,
You know, we've all grown past that, and Tai Chi needs to present some viable alternative to things like yoga, CrossFit, UFC, et cetera, et cetera. And it needs to make a name for itself with genuine benefits for at least for somebody, and not just tricking people out of the
yeah.
money.
And I guess the thing is with things like yoga and whatever, jujitsu, within those communities, that there's not as much disagreement with regard to what constitutes what should be going on in a yoga class or pretty much all the BJJ classes kind of look pretty similar. But with Tai Chi, there's kind of a huge disagreement, I guess, with what we should be doing.
Sure. Well, there's a level of commercial consensus in these other industries that we haven't achieved in Tai Chi for a number of reasons. I think perhaps just more than anything else, because Tai Chi is so difficult. It's so difficult that you have to be a certain type of person to reach real expertise, and that kind of almost pushes out the opportunity to focus on the business skills which bring it all together.
That you need to get people into the class. If you're selling something, in a way, it needs to be something easy or
Well, it's I don't
beautiful.
I
Yeah,
don't mean to say that Tai Chi should be easy or should be made easy. But communication
or
about the
accessible,
benefits
maybe.
of
Yeah.
the art is totally separate. And the ability to do that well is just not something you get automatically by showing up for a Tai Chi class, even for 1,000 years. So it takes a very special person to be able to bring all of these things together.
Yeah. So, in terms of the sort of the martial effectiveness of Tai Chi, do you I guess believe that it's the supreme ultimate martial art, or do you sort of take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt? I mean, I guess many people would think maybe if you want to get good at fighting, you would do Muay Thai and BJJ and MMA. I guess where do you see Tai Chi fitting in with more a sport based fighting, or because maybe there's not that many Tai Chi fighters,
Well,
or maybe there's not any Tai Chi fighters. Yeah,
don't know how many Tai Chi fighters there are because people with a working brain don't like to have it concussed. All right. So let's say, based on the public footage, one who is outside Tai Chi might conclude that it is okay at grappling and bad at striking. I can understand why people would reach that conclusion. Uh, it's not right, but that's okay. It's been my practice not to put anybody on video when it's going to hurt their business interests or humiliate them. I just keep that quietly. I have a lot of footage that I haven't and won't share. I have a lot of stories that I haven't and won't share. But long story short, Tai Chi is an effective martial art. And it doesn't need to be supreme ultimate is just another
yeah,
misconception based on not having a good understanding. So we don't have to say Tai Chi is better than everybody else. We can simply say that it's good and we're willing and able to prove it. That's quite
yeah.
enough.
And I guess when you say it's effective, that could mean various things. It might be effective against an untrained attacker. It might be less effective against somebody who's done a lot of Muay Thai or BJJ or a trained mixed martial artist. Or do you think
Well, it's
it could be?
quite ironic because the most famous Tai Chi match in modern history was an MMA guy versus another MMA guy, and somehow one of them was called a Tai Chi master. I don't know exactly how that happened. But if you actually watch his footage, Without, okay.
Okay, thanks for coming back, Chris. When we got cut off, I think you were talking about the martial effectiveness of Tai Chi. I've just got a few more questions before we finish. I think you mentioned that you went to Handan, the ancestral home of Yang Luchan. Why was it important for you to sort of visit Handan, and how was your trip?
Yeah, right. Well, a couple of entities in China decided they wished to sponsor a cultural exchange week for Tai Chi practitioners in the United States. And my school was one of the lucky few selected to participate in that. So, thanks to the gracious hosting of the Chinese government, of the Wu Family Tai Chi Association, or maybe Wu Hao Family in English,
Yeah.
uh, and Hebei Zhongding High School. Uh, some of my students and I went over to China and spent a week traveling around and, let's say, sampling and enjoying Tai Chi across the country.
And
And it was really,
how did you find sort of the overall standard of Tai Chi? I mean, I guess when I first moved to China, maybe I wasn't that impressed. I guess I was impressed by the amount of people who were practicing, but when I sort of looked at the quality of the forms being done in the parks, I didn't really think it was any better than I guess what I had previously studied in England. How
uh,
did you sort of find the overall standard, or did you find any big differences between Tai Chi in China and Tai Chi in the US? Or
sure. So I should explain that maybe half of the time that I spent in China on this last trip, not my first trip, my third, uh, was spent in the context of the Handan International Tai Chi Championship. So these are not random people doing Tai Chi in the park, which I do support, by the way, but these were a higher grade of practitioner. And I was really happy to be there and, let's say, to experience how much we had in common. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things across the world at large and all claiming that it's authentic Tai Chi Chuan. But in Handan, people were a lot closer to each other in terms of their values and their skill sets. Even so-called different styles of Tai Chi were a lot more similar at that event than they have been at the world at large.
okay,
And that was great.
I guess when I was in China, I didn't really feel there was a big culture of pushing hands with different schools. That often maybe I found that people were quite reluctant to sort of push outside of their school and system and cross train. Do you think that's a sort of a fair criticism that maybe there's worried about a loss of face and not wanting to dishonor their teacher and lineage by performing poorly in competitive push hands? I know
I
that.
think that's absolutely true. I think that there's a lot of talk about the importance of face in China, which is true, but face is also important everywhere else as well. And I see hesitation across the board, across the world, from people who believe they have some high or important position, to be exposed for whatever their actual position really is in the world.
Oh, okay. And I was also curious to ask about, I think you had mentioned in a previous interview that you spent some time at the Shaolin Temple. I guess I went to the Shaolin Temple in 2007, but as a tourist and
Mhm.
not a student. And again, I was slightly disappointed by the Shaolin Temple. I did for a variety of reasons. I mean, I did like the martial arts demonstrations, but I guess maybe I didn't experience much see much evidence of any kind of spirituality or spiritual practices going on there. I think maybe my most vivid memory of the day was of a monk yelling at a construction worker that, there was a lot, I could see that it was a money spinner for them. And I guess I'd have been to quite a few Chinese temples by that time. So I wasn't that impressed by the architecture of the temple. The kung fu demonstrations were okay, but it's not the nicest part of China to visit as well in many ways. So, could you tell me a little bit about your experience? And maybe you went there as a student and maybe had some more positive experiences of the Shaolin Temple than I did. So, um,
So yeah, the history of the Shaolin Temple is like this. A very popular movie came out in like 1981 or so with Jet Li. And after that point, the Shaolin Temple was rebuilt and it was operated as a commercial entity, let's just say, not exclusively, but as a commercial entity until maybe around 1998, when I think some government officials decided they wanted to clean it up a little bit. So if you came around 2007-ish, then you would have experienced Shaolin Temple after multiple transformations. I went there around 2000, 2002, that time when the transformation was taking place. And so that is one factor, which of course will change your experience. Another one was the fact that I was there on a private training program, which was not the same curriculum offered to tourists. So I think it's the case there as the same as anywhere else. Uh, the people who are serious don't necessarily want to interact with people who are going around every day trying to get a photo op and then skedaddle. So I also did interact with the public face of Shaolin, and my experience maybe was similar to yours, but I went past the door, so to
yeah.
speak. So that was quite nice.
Oh, okay, so you would say that there's some skill there, and again, it's maybe the skill is maybe more of a demonstration skill than a fighting skill. Do you think, or do you
They
just?
have they have real kung fu there. They won't necessarily show it to you, but they have it. In fact, one of the many memorable experiences I had there, I think I shared one on my previous interview. I'll share another one now. My roommate there on one of my trips was one of the head instructors for a martial arts franchise in California. And not everybody who went with me on this trip was interested in martial arts. Many were just interested in Negung and meditation. But my roommate was quite interested in martial arts. And he went there for, let's say, a private lesson with one of the teaching martial monks. He came back with his legs just bruised up and down. And he said no matter what he tried to do, the other guy just kicked him in the leg. And he kicked him in the leg for like 30 to 60 minutes straight. And he was so deflated because he didn't get to use his techniques on the monk, and the monk wasn't interested in doing anything but kicking him in the leg. So, whoever thinks that Muay Thai or MMA invented leg kicks has another thing coming.
Oh, okay. Well, it's good. It's good to hear that there is some sort of genuine martial arts training going on there, not just sort of money spinning kind of public demonstrations. So I think the final question I had on my list for you was maybe about chi.
Mhm.
I might ask more broadly about which Chinese terms you think are useful to a Tai Chi practitioner. And I guess as Westerners, often I feel maybe the Chinese terms are used in a way that probably doesn't help the student, perhaps. Do you use many sort of Chinese terms like qi or fajin or song, or those? What do you think these terms have any usefulness for a Tai Chi student? Or
Yeah, well, when a English speaking Tai Chi practitioner uses a word like Chi to instruct their English speaking audience, they're not using the Chinese term. They are using a redefinition of the term that maybe sounds similar, maybe not even that. So I don't know who this is serving. I mean, I do know who, but I don't want to say. I don't think, I generally try to avoid using Chinese terms if there is an English word that conveys the meaning I intend. Sometimes there isn't, actually, usually there isn't, but the way I address that is not just by repeating a Chinese term that they can't contextualize properly, but by explaining it as thoroughly as necessary. But qi is one of those words that Tai Chi people just have spent too much time talking about, to the detriment of their skills and understanding.
So if a student says, Chris, what is chi? Is chi real? How do I get more chi? How would you respond to those kind of questions? Yeah.
Do a stance. I tell them to do another rep, and we'll find a concrete problem with that. So I only talk about abstract ideas with my most senior students because they're actually the only people who benefit from that. If you can't do 3 postures, then don't ask me to intellectualize your current physical failings. We should address those. And that's the only way you can actually understand the more subtle and abstract high-level Tai Chi principles. It's not possible. You can't go around. You can't do a single stance, but you think you understand high-level theory. It's not possible.
And I guess you mentioned current physical failings. Which are the most noticeable physical failings that you see in your students then? Is it just lack of stamina, lack of flexibility, leg strength, or?
Well, it's been said that sitting is the new smoking, and I have to agree with that. I spent 20 plus years as a professional engineer, and I know the effects. I know the eye strain, the RSI, the tight hip flexors, glute amnesia, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the people I interact with are suffering from these conditions, and it's not any sort of moral failing, but it is a real issue that we have to address for the sake of our health and the sake of our ability to reach a higher level of Tai Chi understanding.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Good answer. I'm going to have to get going now. I'm sorry I don't have time to speak longer today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for giving me time and also waiting around while I tried to get the new Zoom meeting started up while my computer was busy downloading the previous one. So it's been great talking to you. It might take me a few days to edit them together, and I'll send you the link once I've put it up. So please feel free to use the content as you feel fit. So thanks a lot, Chris. I've enjoyed talking to you, and take care, and good luck with your meetup. It's been sort of gaining a bit of traction, hasn't it? A few people coming interstate for your sort of push hands open mat. So I look forward to seeing more footage of from your push hands. I think one of my training partners is thinking of coming to the next one actually. Well, he lives in Brisbane, but he's from the West Coast. So I hope to see more open mats footage. When is your next open mat then? If you want to plug.
Yes, great. Thank you for the opportunity. I think it is tentatively scheduled for late January. We're going to try to do one every 4 to 6 months. It's always a little bit tricky to find a host that we can afford in the Seattle area. It's a very expensive place to live.
Yeah.
But one way or another, we will make it happen.
Okay, great. Well, good luck with your open mats and with your push hand competitions and your teaching more generally. So thanks a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it. So take care. It's been good talking to you. I've got to fly off now, so I'll wave goodbye and I'll end the meeting now.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Take care.
Okay, cheers.